another bad trade. How many of you guys have ever heard of Samson? My mom, there's a show on TV or on Amazon or something called Reacher, and it's this big, I don't know, big muscle guy, and he kills everybody and beats everybody up, and he's just real tough. And my mom calls Tater Reacher. She says, "That's my Reacher, big, strong." Well, my grandmother used to call me Samson. So she would call, and she's like, "How's my Samson doing?" I'm like, "My mom Samson was stupid." but he was the strongest man ever. God had given him strength. God had given him favor. And we read about how he defeated Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, and how he won all these marvelous battles, and how God was with him, and how he was so touched by God. The Bible never says that Samson was an opposing figure. We don't know that he was a big Reacher-like person. He may have been just a small, skinny guy with abnormal, godly strength. We don't know. But we know that he was pretty bad. I mean, he killed like thousands of Philistines with a bone of a donkey. He was a bad man. He had God on his side, and he had that presence of God that just allowed him to just conquer and to just do things that are abnormally amazing. And then he meets this chick named Delilah. Now, as my wife would call her, a floozy. She throws that word around quite a bit. Whether we're walking in the mall, sitting in Cracker Barrel. But I like the way that one person describes Delilah here. It says that she had honey on her lips, but poison in her heart. Man, how many of you guys have dated somebody? How many of you guys have dated a Delilah? I didn't marry her, but I dated a Delilah. And, we see here how she was working with the Philistines to begin with. And she's trying to find out where Samson gets his unusual strength. Where does he get this? So he puts her through all these tests. She asks him all these questions and tells her all these crazy things. And then finally one day, he gives in and he tells her, "Hey, if you cut my hair, I'll be as weak as any other man." So she cuts his hair, and she catches him asleep and cuts his hair. Let me read to you what happens here. It says that she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go before, as any other time, shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed him. That was a bad trade. Here this girl who he thinks is so beautiful and so great, and the whole time, she's just poison. And yet Samson, who had so many things going for him, he had, the power of God on his life. He had all this strength and all this might and stuff that only comes from God. And yet he traded it all for a woman who, in all likelihood, didn't care anything about him. Now, we think of Samson, we think of that as a tragedy, but we also see later on in the New Testament, Samson is mentioned again with the likes of David, Saul, or Samuel, Gideon, Moses, for what has become known as the Hall of Faith. So even though we know at the end of the story, when Moses is there in front of the big temple, and all the Philistines are making fun of him, and he's got his hands tied to the pillars on each side. They've already poked his eyes out. He's blind, and he talks to God one last time. He says, "God, give me the strength to defeat my enemies." And God answers him. So even though Samson went so far and he made a bad trade, God still answered him. Now I want to talk about, this is my last one, probably one of the worst trades. Well, definitely the worst trade ever. From a man who walked with Jesus, who saw the miracles of Jesus, who was fed by Jesus, and who knew Jesus on an intimate level, and yet he traded Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Now, 30 pieces of silver now, or 30 pieces of silver at that time was worth about $600. And you think trading Babe Ruth was bad for $100,000. You think the guy who lost $120 billion worth of Apple, that was a bad trade. But this man traded Jesus for $600. And, we read here, it says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he seized with remorse and returned 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders and said, I have sinned. And he said, I have betrayed innocent blood. And they said to him, what is that to us? They replied, that's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money at the temple, left, and he went away and hanged himself. So he saw what he did, and he was bitterly sorrowful. But he went and hung himself. I want to talk to us today. This is I'm about to wrap it up. But how are you trading what God has given you? How are we using the time that God has given us? How are we using the abilities that God gives us? Are we trading them for something automatic? We look back at Jacob and Esau, and we see how Esau traded for a bowl of soup. He traded everything for a bowl of soup. Say, well, I would never do something like that. That's stupid. And yet, we find ourselves trading our salvation, trading our soul for something immediate gratification, something that brings us pleasure, something that brings us happiness right then, something, just quick, something that we can have right then. And then we see Samson, who had everything going for him, and traded it for the love of another. He traded it for somebody who wasn't his spouse for sure, and he traded everything that God had given him for pleasure, for the pleasure of a woman with honey on her lips and poison in her heart. And then we see Judas. Judas is a little more complicated. I'm not sure that Judas traded Jesus for the 30 pieces of silver. I'm not sure that was the ultimate thing that Judas wanted, was the money. I think, there's a lot deeper things there. And I think that's the way it is with us sometimes. It's not necessarily the money that we're chasing. Maybe it's the fame, maybe it's the all the accolades and stuff that comes with it. Or maybe it's other things that we're chasing. Whatever we're chasing, it's not worth trading our salvation for. And yet so many times we find ourselves in a position where we have an opportunity to trade our salvation, to trade our soul, to trade what God has given us for something here, for something on earth, whether it be someone other than your wife, someone other than your husband, whether it be a dollar amount, whether it be people bragging on you, or an advancement at work, an advancement in whatever. And we make bad trades. We're trading ourselves, we're trading our soul, we're trading our dignity, we're trading our pride, we're trading everything that God has given us for something instantaneous, or for money, or for lust, or for whatever. So how are we using our gifts that God's given us, our time and our abilities? How are we trading these things? This isn't a big fiery message. I'm nowhere near as good a preacher as Steve. You'll realize that. But how are we trading our time? It's something that made me ask myself. When I had an accident a few years ago, and when I was going through all the stuff that comes along with that, and I was asking myself, what am I doing? I'm working 10, 12 hours a day or whatever, coming home, going to bed, getting up, just the same old thing every day, and just doing the same old thing. But how am I, furthering the kingdom of God? How am I living my life? How am I using what God has given me? The most valuable thing God has given me is salvation. The second most valuable thing God has given me is time. How am I using what God has given me? We trade it for everything, things that aren't important, things that don't matter. And we're trading these things, and we're losing sight of the things that God wants us to do, and the things that God has for us, and the things that are really important. I'm sure when Esau left there, and a couple years later, he looked back and he's like, man, I could have waited a little bit on that bowl of soup. I'm sure when Samson's got his eyes poked out and he's down there in the dungeon or whatever, milling grain or whatever, he's like, you know what? She wasn't that good looking. And I'm sure when Judas was on his way to hang himself, he's thinking, man, I really screwed up. And we've all been in that position. We've all been in a position where we thought, man, I could have waited on that. We've all been in that position where we're like, man, that person really wasn't that good looking. And we've all been in that position where we're thinking, man, I really screwed up. The good news is that none of us have went so far that God can't save us. Whether we're 14 years old, whether we're 80 years old, we've never went so far that God can't save us. And when I opened up earlier, and when Dave sang that song, God never fails us. He never just leaves us. He's always there for us. So I know in life I've made some bad trades, and I'm not just talking about buying a timeshare. I've made some bad trades. And, I've made some big mistakes. And there's times that I went to altar over and over again for the same mistake, for the same trade-off. And God is always there to forgive me. So this morning I want to ask you, have you made some bad trades? Have you traded your dignity? Have you traded, your salvation? Have you traded what God has given you for something temporary, or for something immediate, or for something that's not really that good looking, or for something that you wish you never had? All of us can raise our hand because we all have. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? God is there to forgive us. God is always just to forgive us and always, there for us. So we have an opportunity this morning. There's no way I can get out of a timeshare, but there's ways we can get out of the trades that we've